Khamzat Chimaev.
Khamzat Chimaev began his professional MMA career in 2018, and it didn't take long for him to get called up to compete in the UFC. After achieving more hype in a shorter amount of time than anyone in the history of our beloved sport, that hype soon began to die as a result of health issues, inactivity, and a somewhat lackluster performance against Kamaru Usman at UFC 294. Before I get into today's video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It's free, and the sooner I get to 1,000 subscribers, the sooner I can attempt to get monetized and bring you guys more videos on a more frequent basis. This is my 15th resume review, and I'll leave the others, along with every Khamzat Chimaev fight that's been uploaded online, in the description below. The Chechnya native's martial arts background began with freestyle wrestling, a sport he started practicing at age 5. He notably went on to claim a bronze medal at the Russian National Championships at the junior level. At the age of 18, Chimaev moved to Sweden with his mother, where he claimed 3 national championships at the senior level, along with 3 other gold medals in other Swedish tournaments. During this time, he outscored his opponents 156-8 across 23 matches, totaling 14 tech falls and 7 pins, competing at 86 kilograms or 190 pounds in his first 5 tournaments, before moving up to 92 kilograms or 203 pounds for his last. In addition, he also faced fellow Sweden native and UFC middleweight contender Jack Hermansson in a freestyle competition back in 2021, winning the match 8-0, making him 24-0 as a senior freestyle competitor. Khamzat began training MMA at age 23, taking his first amateur fight in 2017. Inside of 6 months, he climbed to 3-0 with 3 finishes, picking up second-round submission victories in his first and second fights, one each a Darce and a guillotine, before a 57-second TKO in his third. The most notable of these wins came against Khalid Lalam, who went on to become an IMMAF amateur world champion following defeat to Chimaev and is currently 5-0 as a professional. Chimaev then turned professional in May of 2018, defeating 1-1 guard Olve Sagan via TKO in round 2, before submitting 2-4 Ole Magner with a rear naked choke late in round 1. He started taking harder fights after this, facing 5-0 Marko Kizic in his third professional fight at Brave CF 18, absolutely dominating the fight with his wrestling en route to a first-round TKO victory just over 3 minutes in. Chimaev returned later that year to TKO 8-3 Sidney Wheeler in just 35 seconds, making him 4-0 in 2018, or 5-0 if you counted his last amateur fight. Next, Chimaev faced 8-0 fellow UFC middleweight talent Ikram Alaskarov at Brave CF 23, who he KO'd stiff with an uppercut just before the midway point of round 1, by far his biggest win to this point. Chimaev's last fight in the promotion came at Brave CF 27 against a 4-0 opponent I'm not even going to attempt to butcher the name of, sorry bud, who he mauled with his wrestling en route to a second-round Darce choke submission victory. Chimaev then made his UFC debut, taking a short-notice fight and replacing the injured Dusko Todorovic to face 22-9 John Phillips at the first-ever UFC Fight Island event, just over 2 years after making his professional debut. Phillips isn't the best fighter in the world by any means, but he is a former Bama middleweight champion. He was coming off a brutal 17-second KO win in his latest appearance, and he boasted 22 finishes and 22 total wins, 20 of which came via knockout. Not to mention, facing someone with over 30 pro fights when you have just 6 is no easy task. For most, that is. It was, however, an easy task for Chimaev, who took Phillips down just 5 seconds into the contest. Chimaev beat on Phillips throughout the entirety of round 1, before securing another early takedown in the second just 12 seconds in. 1 minute later, and he secured a Darce choke submission win and was now 7-0 as a professional. Someone made a Facebook post going into this event and posted a picture of Chimaev, stating he was going to be a real problem in the UFC. Well, that group member, whoever it was, knew something we didn't and clearly pays close attention to the sport. After defeating Phillips at 185 pounds, Chimaev dropped down to welterweight for his next fight just 10 days later when he faced 10-2-1 Cage Warriors welterweight champion Reese McKee at UFC Fight Island 3, breaking the record for the fastest turnaround in UFC history. Khamzat got McKee down 14 seconds in and just smashed him from top position en route to his 3-minute 9-second TKO stoppage. After this victory, Chimaev had already outstruck UFC opponents a whopping 192-2 in total strikes. Another record was broken in his next fight, where he returned less than 2 months later to pick up his third straight octagon victory in 66 days, when he faced 31-13 Gerald Meerschaert in his return to 185 pounds. It took Chimaev just 17 seconds to KO GM3 with a vicious right cross, flooring him on the spot. A lot of us thought this would be a dangerous matchup for him, given how good Meerschaert is on the mat, boasting a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and some also thought his size could be a factor. Meerschaert at this point has the most submission victories in UFC middleweight history with 11, and also the highest finish rate of any UFC fighter ever with 12 finishes and 12 total promotional wins. After this win, many people were predicting Chimaev would become the first ever three-division UFC champion. He just had no weak areas. Obviously, he was a great wrestler that could blend his grappling in with it beautifully, and he's clearly strong as hell, but here we saw he has real power at 185 pounds. Chimaev was next expected to return to the welterweight division for a main event slot with future, now former UFC welterweight champion Leon Edwards at UFC Fight Night 183, though he tested positive for COVID in the lead-up and the bout was put in jeopardy. In turn, Leon also caught the fake flu and the bout was postponed. The UFC tried twice more to book this fight, at UFC Fight Night 185, and then again another headline slot at UFC Fight Night 187, both of which fell through as Chimaev was dealing with the lingering effects of corona. Eventually, 13 months after his latest appearance, Chimaev finally returned to the octagon and the welterweight division to face number 11 ranked 18-6 Li Jingyuling at UFC 267, Jingyuling of which was 7-2 in his last 9 going in with 5 knockouts. Chimaev's dominance continued in this one, getting the leech down early, taking his back, and sinking in the rear naked choke for the finish at 3:16 of the first. This was his third straight opponent in a row that failed to land a single strike against him. Chimaev outlanding his opponents 254-2 in total strikes through 4 fights, which is just a staggering statistic. Khamzat's next fight came just over 5 months later at UFC 273 when he faced number 2 ranked former welterweight title challenger Gilbert Burns, who was 20-4 as a professional, including a 7-1 run in his last 8, only losing a title fight to Kamaru Usman in that time. This was by far the toughest test of his career, and it showed us exactly what he was made of. Chimaev tried for an early takedown and eventually got Burns down to the mat before letting him back up, where Burns landed a solid leg kick followed by a right hand and then a stiff jab. The striking exchanges from here were quite even until Chimaev dropped Burns with a jab of his own in the final minute of the opening round. He rained down some good ground and pound from top position before again allowing Burns back to his feet. Chimaev's striking looked good early on in the second, though he was caught by a left hand that stumbled him backwards. Burns followed it up with a nice body kick before Chimaev landed a good kick of his own. Burns tried securing a takedown, which was easily shrugged off by Chimaev. He then landed a good left hook as Chimaev was coming in, dropping him to his knees momentarily before unloading on a combination. Chimaev landed a good combination of his own and took the center back immediately following. The two each landed a lot of good strikes onto one another from here, especially as the second round came to a close.
Now.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that hurt him. Jab for Burns, gets through it, a big right hand.
Landed.
I don't see either guy's toughness at this point. Nice
Great
sprawl from
Oh,
Chimaev.
As we come up on a minute to go in the round, nice right hand over the top.
Oh, geez.
Good right hand by Chimaev.
Oh, nice in the round for Chimaev.
He's down.
Big elbows from Burns and a takedown for Khamzat.
Visibly tired going into the first ever round 3 of his entire career, Khamzat bit down on his mouthpiece, kept walking forward, and threw heavy leather. He ate a trio of right hands in the final minute of the third, but had a strong finish to the fight and was ultimately awarded the universal 29-28 unanimous decision victory. This was an absolutely massive win for Khamzat, who proved he really can do it all in this fight. We knew he had great wrestling, grappling, and power, but his striking showed itself to be far more technical than anyone gave him credit for previous, switching stances and landing a lot of good punches and kicks, not to mention the heart he showed. He stuffed all 5 of Burns' takedown attempts and secured 2 of his own as well, in the only fight of the night performance in his career. This was a straight-up war that was incredibly fun to watch. Chimaev was next expected to face Nate Diaz in the main event of UFC 279, though he missed weight, by a large margin too, I might add, weighing in at 178.5 pounds, 7.5 pounds over the welterweight non-title fight limit. In turn, the UFC had to do some last-minute scrambling to keep the card together. Tony Ferguson was scheduled to face Li Jingyuling at this event, and Kevin Holland was expected to face Daniel Rodriguez. As a result of Khamzat's weight miss, the UFC had him fight Kevin Holland, booked Diaz versus Ferguson for the main event, Jingyuling fighting Rodriguez as well. So really, it couldn't have worked out any better. The UFC kept all 6 men affected on the card, with brand new matchups that were honestly better than the originals. No one was really clamoring to see Khamzat face 23-7 Kevin Holland, especially after just beating the number 2 ranked guy in the world, but the same could be said about him fighting Nate Diaz. It was as pointless of a fight as could have possibly been made. And for Nate's last fight in the promotion, too. They're doing the same thing to Nick Diaz, having him fight Vicente Luque after just 1 fight in 10 years. There are better matchups to make for legends of the sport than to just feed them to dangerous contenders. They deserve better than that. Nonetheless, Holland, like Chimaev, was undefeated since dropping down to 170 pounds with stoppage wins over Alex Oliveira and Tim Means. If we thought Chimaev had a fast start to his previous fights, this one puts him to shame. He charged Holland the very second this fight began, and a very exciting wrestling sequence ensued. Right from the opening bell, Holland couldn't get Chimaev off him. After securing the takedown, Khamzat settled in Holland's guard before passing over, allowing Holland back to his feet. But he didn't stay upright for long as Khamzat dragged him back down and locked in a Darce choke. It took him a minute to get the tap from it. Holland certainly tried battling his way out, but the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt was unable to and was ultimately submitted with it just over 2 minutes in. And it's a good thing too because Khamzat used a tremendous amount of energy in this one. After the severe weight miss, the UFC made Chimaev move back up to middleweight, though it would be another 13 months before we'd see him compete again. He was intended to face former middleweight title challenger Paulo Costa at UFC 294, though Costa was forced from the bout with an elbow injury and replaced by 20-3 former UFC welterweight champion Kamaru Usman. This was still a very compelling matchup because Usman, like Chimaev, is a freestyle wrestling national champion, and we wanted to see how he'd match up against by far the greatest wrestler he'd ever fought. Khamzat shot in on that low single leg he's known for in the opening seconds, eventually taking Usman's back 1 minute in. Usman at one point tried spiking Chimaev on his head, but it didn't work in getting him off, as he held back mount for the remaining 4 minutes of the first. Round 2 was a much different story, however. Not much happened through the near first 4 minutes of it until Usman landed a solid 2-punch combination followed by a leg kick. Honestly, that probably would have won him the round considering that was really the only thing to score in it, until Khamzat perfectly timed another takedown with about 45 seconds remaining on the clock. Usman's striking was beginning to show itself in the third and final round. He was boxing Chimaev up on the feet until he was again taken down and put on his back at the midway point of it. He remained on top of Usman for 2 minutes until Usman finally got back up in the final 30 seconds. By the fight's end, one judge scored it 28-28, a draw, and the other two gave it to Khamzat 29-27, ultimately awarding him the majority decision victory. Many fans weren't pleased with this fight, given Chimaev's endurance was clearly in question and his striking didn't impress. He stated after the fight that he believed he broke his right hand in the opening round, however, thus the reason he couldn't strike with it. It turned out to be a torn ligament, but still a compromising injury nonetheless. I even heard some people online saying they thought Usman won this fight, which is just ridiculous. I mean, not even close. There's a case you could give Khamzat all 3 rounds. Certainly 2 of them, and the first was a 10-8. I, for one, didn't hate this performance, though. Usman is one of the better wrestlers in MMA history, and he'd only ever been taken down a single time in his entire career going into this one. Chimaev took him down 4 times in just 15 minutes, and though his pace slowed, he did what he needed to do to remain undefeated. Chimaev was then expected to headline UFC on ABC 6, opposing 26-7 former UFC middleweight champion, number 3 ranked Robert Whittaker, though he was forced from the bout with an illness and replaced by Ikram Aliskerov. The Russian came into this fight against Whittaker with a record of 15-1, only losing to Chimaev in the past. He was on a 7-fight win streak with a whopping 3 Kimura finishes, and he was 2-0 in the UFC with back-to-back first-round knockout wins over Phil Hawes and Wartley Alves. Whittaker stopped Aliskerov pretty much the same way Chimaev did, with an uppercut before the midway point of round 1. Following this knockout win, and a quite ironic, remarkable parallel, Whittaker still wanted the Chimaev fight, where the two were scheduled for a 5-round co-main event at UFC 308. 1 year and 5 days following Chimaev's latest appearance. There were so many questions going into this one. I, for one, thought Whittaker would probably lose the opening round, but survive the early storm and either stop Khamzat late or pick up a handed decision. You see, Whittaker is a difficult guy to get down, and he's even harder to hold down. He picked up freestyle wrestling himself in the middle of his MMA career and won 2 national championship gold medals in Australia, which is pretty insane when you think about it. This guy never wrestled a day in his life until he started training MMA. He was a Hapkido fighter. Then you consider how great of a striker he is. Whittaker may have gotten caught a couple times in his career, but it's quite rare we see strikers as educated on the feet as him. Then mix in the fact that he'd gone 14-3 since moving up to 185 pounds in 2014, only losing to former champion Israel Adesanya and current champion Dricus du Plessis in that time. I really thought Khamzat was going to have his hands full in this one, but it turned out to be an easy night at the office. He perfectly timed and executed a takedown early on in the bout, as he's obviously known for, partially taking the back of the former champion along the cage. Whittaker initially defended well on the mat, but lost each scramble and attempt to escape. Chimaev didn't go crazy and blow his wad here, again, like I kind of thought he would, but instead picked his shots carefully and only struck at opportune times. By this point, Chimaev had Whittaker's back, and it was only a matter of time before he wrapped his arm around Whittaker's chin, forcing a quick tap at 3:34 of the opening round. Turns out there was a reason for that immediate tap. I thought Whittaker was obviously in severe pain, but it was far worse than just pain. Khamzat literally broke Whittaker's teeth and dislocated his jaw in a matter of a split second with that neck crank. It was a truly incredible performance, especially when you consider Whittaker hadn't been submitted since his first ever defeat in 2011, well before his UFC career ever started. This one certainly got Chimaev back all that hype he once had. I don't know that he'll become a 3-division champion, but he's clearly a top 3 middleweight on the planet right now. With this victory, a lot of people are thinking he'll pass up former champion Sean Strickland for a title shot against Dricus du Plessis. And while I'd certainly feel for Strickland should that happen, I wouldn't hate it. Strickland, to many, should arguably still be the champion, losing the title to du Plessis at UFC 297 in a 5-round split decision that many scored for him. He even since returned to beat Paulo Costa at UFC 302, a fight some don't even believe he should have had to take. But Whitaker is better than Costa. He even proved it when they fought earlier this year at UFC 298. And a first-round stoppage like Khamzat just pulled off is far more impressive than Strickland's split decision over Costa, though anyone that watched that fight knows it should have been unanimous. Khamzat beat the better fighter, and he did it far more impressively. There are still questions to be answered about Chimaev, though. Like, how would he do in a 5-round fight? He's competed in fights that were scheduled for 5 rounds a couple times, against Kevin Holland and Robert Whitaker. Kamaru Usman stated that he was offered 5 rounds when he took the fight with Chimaev, though he turned it down considering he took it on short notice, and he regrets it and wished that he would have agreed to 5 rounds. After watching that fight back, I don't blame him. And with how Khamzat looked the 2 times that he went 3 rounds, absolutely exhausted at the end of both, it does make me question how he would look should a fight of his go that long. But with the way he just finished Whitaker, it makes me wonder if anyone can survive him at this point. At 30 years of age, Khamzat Chimaev should just now be entering his peak, and he just improved to 14-0 with 12 finishes following last month's victory, making him 17-0 with 15 finishes overall in MMA, including his amateur run. He's got an amateur world champion on that resume and now also 2 UFC champions. Then you mix in his 24-0 senior freestyle record. That's 41-0 across 41 one-on-one competitions. That's about as dominant as it gets. It was starting to look like Chimaev was going to turn into the greatest what-if in MMA history for a while there, but his coaches decided to switch up his training methods going into the Whitaker fight, and it may have saved his career. He doesn't overwork himself to exhaustion anymore, as he always did before, but instead takes a far wiser approach to his camps, and that honestly could make all the difference in the world. Chimaev is notorious for going hard for hours on end at his practices, something that everyone that trains with him has stated he does, or at least used to do. He never gave his body any real time to rest and recover, and it probably hindered him greatly. Now that he's got this new, wiser approach to training, he may just achieve those heights most of us predicted he always would. That about does it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one.